Please be aware this will be a spoiler-filled discussion. Hello, and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society, where we're ticking all the boxes and providing the much-needed minority opinion in popular internet discourse. I'm Matty, and I lead the film discussions.
Boo! I'm Josh. I lead the music discussions.
And welcome to this very special Halloween, not released on Halloween episode, where we're going to be talking about the first Nightmare on Elm Street film. We do have a second part coming where we talk about the two subsequent sequels, Freddy's Revenge and Dream Warriors. But I just wanted to give the first one its own episode, just because it was a moment, and obviously it was part of a broader scene of slashers as a whole. But I think this is a really important film, and the sequels are kind of exist in their own world as well. Not totally distinct from this, but I think they have their own discussion.
That's something I wanted to ask you. When I finished Elm Street 3,
Yeah.
and I was looking at like Amazon has like advertising, the 4, 5, and 6,
Yeah.
the last half of the original saga, if you would call it that.
Yeah.
And I was like looking at these crazy covers of like Freddy doing like awkward hand poses in front of like a janky picture of some teenagers screaming. And I
They
really
had to
like
find so many different poses for him to do. They were really running out towards the end.
and reading like the plot synopses of like all the different ways Freddy tries to revive himself and how it just like becomes this weird nonsensical cartoon about Freddy just
Yeah.
being this funny guy. And I became like completely enraptured by it, and I was like, can we do this on this show at some point? Can we cover 4 to 6
Yeah.
and complete the Freddy saga? Because I mean, his story isn't done.
No, I would love to do that. I just yeah.
Not now, even of course,
No.
but at some point,
Well, right now, Josh.
I'd really love to do it.
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome. Apparently, New Nightmare is really good and like weird as well. So I really want to watch that. And I do just want to see how they keep coming up with excuses for Freddy coming back, because I don't know. Opinions aside on the second two, there is like no, they don't try to explain right how he's like survived the first one. It's not really, so like it will just become hilarious watching them deal with the consequences of like not establishing rules early on, just because Wes Craven was just like, I'm gonna make a movie, and then it was very successful.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about the first one, like especially the ending and the not establishing rules, is the ending was like studio mandated, like where they have to put in the Freddy jumps out of the window and grabs the mother bit, because horror movies have to end that way all the time. So in my head, I kind of have a thing like when I watch a horror film and it ends with that the final scope, they're still out there. I almost like don't consider it canon. I'm like, oh, this is just how horror movies end. But like, otherwise, it doesn't thematically mean anything or do anything.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy because apparently Wes Craven was angry about that, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't blame him. Like, I would be straight up. I fucking hate that that's in the film. I don't know. Because it existed in a time where I feel like that was less of a given. I feel like it's like became a given after this. And I was just like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? But I feel like I'm getting close to my opinion. But yeah, it is weird that it's just sad. Yeah, we'll definitely get there.
I do think this is like a really fascinating saga, like this franchise, and I would love to review all of them pretty much. Like, it's so fucking like the 6-part story, and then the New Nightmare, which is just like a meta narrative thing of Freddy trying to kill the actors from the original film. And then there's the reboot, which is like this edgy CGI remake. All of it just looks fucking nuts to me.
It really is like a platter handcrafted for me, and like an afternoon of like, well, Here I go down this hole. Except all of them cost like £3.50 to rent on Amazon, so I wasn't about to like. I did want to watch more, but I was like, I can't justify spending this much this month on. I guess it's Halloween month, aka October. But anyway,
But yeah,
um,
Nightmare on Elm Street 1984. Had you seen this before?
no, I hadn't actually. In typical Matty fashion, I used the podcast as an excuse to watch real movies. Uh, but of course, I've got my course back again to do that for me as well. So this was a busy month for me.
Mm.
Uh, where to begin? And I feel like this, amongst other things, is such an artifact, but at the same time, that doesn't affect how it's viewed as an experience. I believe. Like, I think there's
Yeah.
some films that are like too, like, I mean, I guess like Citizen Kane and things like that, which, obviously, I'm not saying people can't watch and sit down and enjoy and get things out of, but like, it's so like, this is the movie. Whereas what I really love about horror at this time is that it's so visually and thematically blends into this world, and it most of the time it's pretty consistently entertaining on whatever level that is.
Mm.
And yeah, so I I would say, like, if I'm doing Halloween movies, I'm going to like this aspect of horror. I love The Lighthouse. I love all that stuff. Cerebral horror is really cool, but sometimes for Halloween, Halloween, you're with
Yeah.
people. You gotta go fun but spooky.
And I think one thing that annoys me about the Nightmare on Elm Street discourse is if you look at like Amazon reviews from like boomers who like really, or Gen X kids who really liked it when they were kids, right?
Hmm.
And they're like, back in the day, this was the scariest shit ever. Of course, now horror movies are even more violent, so this looks pretty tame. But back in the day, this was really. But that's just not fucking true. And I
Yeah.
think the experience of watching this in '84 is very similar to now, where now it comes off as like a cheesy pastiche '80s horror film.
Hmm.
And in '84, I mean, keep like Carpenter had already happened, Kubrick had already happened. Like there were scary movies that existed, and this would have been a dumb, schlocky high school film that you take
Yeah.
your date on, right? Like I feel like this has been weirdly universal. Like it's because we're in that like nostalgia loop that we are currently like in the '80s again. With
Yeah.
we this film is still this one plays very similarly to how it would have played then. Is what I'm saying.
No,
Um,
I think that's so true. And just on the violence thing, yeah, the most successful horror films right now aren't that violent. They're all ghost films, and they're all like, whoa. And supernatural horror, instead of like torture porn or like anything like the or slasher, like, I
mm,
think that's something that's missing. And I hate that. I hate that shit. I hate that back in my day bullshit. It really, like, yeah. I think, well, we can just get into our opinions, because otherwise we'll just be dancing around them all day. So I'll start off, but before I begin, I kind of want to, yeah, kind
yeah,
of in the vein of what.
what is
Mhm.
the plot of A Nightmare on Elm Street? What happens in this film?
So, we open with Tina Gray in a nightmare, running very slowly away from a man with a clawed hand. And we quickly realize that this is a dream as she wakes up. However, her nightgown is still torn from the dream. So this pretty is an incredibly effective opening scene because it just so immediately establishes tone and rules. I think this is just such a like concrete opening to a film. I don't know. There's something so like workmanlike about it, even though, but also still really like fun. So yeah, no, there's no lack of flair here. But anyway, and so what transpires next is a group of classical 80s high schoolers trying to figure out why they're seeing this same man in their nightmares and trying to survive the dangers within as they're slowly plucked off one by one. Uh, yeah, there's a recognizable face of Johnny Depp, which was really weird to see in like a really like supporting role. Like there's really not much else to say about him as a person.
Yeah, it's
Looks good in
odd.
that crop top though.
It's odd that Johnny Depp, who we now recognize as like the kind of weird gothic character in every film, the
Yeah.
oddball. Here he's just like the jock. Like he's the most normal guy he's meant to be.
Yeah. He
It's
it's
very
almost,
strange.
he's kind of not even a jock as well. Like he is, but he's not played up to be a kind of big 80s jock. I guess he's kind of overshadowed by the other guy,
He kind of
Glenn.
feels like a John Hughes jock, like the kind of nice guy jock.
Yeah, that's so real. So following on from the kind of discussion we were having about what these films meant then and what they mean today, I'll definitely be discussing this film and the two sequels in the way that I always treat films, and that's just meeting them where they are. And
Mm.
this isn't to say that horror and other directorial aims are mutually exclusive or
Yeah.
incompatible, but God, if I pretend that the two like okay, quote unquote real movies in this trilogy are anything other than through and through horror thrill rides with some other stuff going on, I'd be lying about the experience that I personally had. I think there are other experiences you can have out of there, but I just don't want to pretend that I'm seeing anything more. But that said, horror being probably my favorite genre, I'm very cautious of like disparaging it. And I think where this film is special and excels is in its theatrics. The kills are glorious and horrifying and excessive. I love the Friday the 13th movies. What I'd say makes those deaths so satisfying is like elaborate bluntness, but here things are drawn out into this spectacle, and it's so grand, and it imbues
Yeah.
the film with this confidence that I'm really missing from campy horror films of today.
Yeah, I think like you said with meeting a film where it's at, like I think judging I mean Craven is like pals of Sam Raimi. Like they're making the same kind of
Mm,
film. They're meant to be like as dumb and fun and gory as possible. And they're not really meant to be scary. They're just meant to like have a scary vibe.
yeah.
But it's mainly just a good time, right? And like judging a slasher film is how interesting is your killer, and like conceptually your killer has to be like if it's like a dumb slasher film that's just trying to be fun,
Mm,
conceptually they have to be built in a way that like allows for interesting kills to happen, which is
yeah.
what I guess makes which I guess it makes sense why there's 6 sequels to this and why Freddy Krueger is so fascinating, because he is like limitless, right? Like he can do anything pretty much. So every kill, of course, oh, the 6 films is going to become a cartoon, but every kill is just exciting and fun to see like how
Mm,
will he warp reality in a different ways. But I do think there is a little bit more. What's nice about this film and the third one, I'd argue, is there is a little bit more going on. Like it is
mhm.
nice that all of Freddy's kills are kind of like weirdly sexual, and it is like there is an implication there of what kind of man Freddy was.
Yeah.
Even though it's never overt in this film. I know they make it overt in the reboot. But here it's very yeah, that I'm your boyfriend now. The lots of licking hands through legs, like coming out of beds and hovering over beds. Like it's very much dealing with, with Freddy is a symbol of like some kind of
The 80s boogeyman.
not just that, but in the older, lecherous older men, right?
Mm,
Who creep over young children and teenagers.
yeah, totally. Following on from that, I think one thing I was worried about when I before we watched this film was I think to bring up Friday the 13th is like is that this would be a film before it found its legs. Like so with these slasher franchises, apart from I mean Halloween is kind of the exception to this as well. I think there is a bit of a thing like where they make the first film and nowadays it's a bit clunky, but as the series goes on, it gets more and more ridiculous, and eventually you end up with Friday the 13th Part 4, which is like the perfect level of like campy and self-aware, but also just like fucking awesome to watch at the same time. And so what I was worried about with this film was having that, but all of the kills here are so visceral, and it's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of like the sequel syndrome, where the first one is the most actually like scary and horrifying. This film is still very campy and theatrical, like in Freddy's introduction when he like licks his claw and says, "No, this is God." I fucking love that line, and I want to talk about that scene more. But at the same time, I think what I loved about this was when people die in this, with one exception, I would say, it's horrible. Like, but also you can never look away because what's being done is so impressive and committed to as well. The camera really isn't scared of the horror in this film, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a problem with the supernatural horror of today. It's just like, this is happening. You're going to be forced to look at this now, and I love it.
Well, I guess I don't know how your relationship to gore is, but as someone who like, I'm not very squeamish at all. I do think the type of gore that's in this film is very like the hyper violent, cartoonish gore that is just like, I mean, slasher films are structured like pornos, right? Like, there's boring talking scenes, and then finally someone gets it. And so in this one, I think I do prefer it structurally to like a Friday the 13th, because the premise allows for like fake horrible stuff happening that doesn't actually take away the characters. So you can open with like a horrible opening scene, but because it's just a dream, that's fine. Whereas the typical Friday the 13th, it takes like what, 30-40 minutes until Jason finally comes and does the Jason things. So here, just like from the get-go, the stupid like Freddy holding out his long arms and waving them in the air, it is just hilarious and rollicking and fun and playful, and it never really lets up, apart from the middle, which is really, I found really boring because they talk a lot and go to like dream clinics, and like Freddy sews his name into his hat. Why would he? It's very thin in the middle, but when it's having fun, like you said, and reveling in the violence, like you said, it's really great. And it has the Sam Raimi like Geysers of Blood aesthetic, which I really adore. As much blood as you can. It doesn't matter if it's biologically possible. I want to see fountains of blood.
There's one geyser of blood that we have to talk about at some point, but I think that pretty introductory scene, it's funny, but I found it fucking terrifying. I thought there was something about like the body horror of his arms being a practical effect that was so unsettling to me. It's just this like large, overwhelming image coming down the alleyway with the camera not breaking from it. That it felt exactly like that image of a nightmare, of like an inescapable evil. I didn't like it.
I guess for me, it just like it didn't have the same effect to me, because it looks too much like the car wash balloon man that stands outside of the car wash and blows in the wind, and I think it's really dumb. And
I really like it. I think it's really scary.
I don't understand how that's scary. But go off.
It's dreams. The whole thing's dreamy, and like I think like people's dreams are so, I don't know, what bothers people in their dreams is so specific to them. Like sometimes people will be telling you like the nightmare they had, and I'm just like, it's just like, okay, like I don't know, especially like anxiety dreams. But anyway,
I do think that this film is unique in the franchise. I do think this is the only film where Freddy is meant to be somewhat menacing. His one-liners in this film are funny, but they're quite like they are a bit more menacing. Like, this is God, I'm your boyfriend now. We haven't hit stand-up comedian Freddy yet. So I do think, even though I don't think this one was actually meant, I wasn't really scared. I do agree that Freddy is more menacing here, and his kills are more like stabby, as opposed to like I'm gonna put you in a television. You know?
Yeah. I do see what you mean. Before I get on something, yeah, I'll respond to that before I get on to something else. Like, I think the first kill, which is perhaps my favorite, we will pick favorite kills at the end, but I think that perfectly toes the line between actually scary and like unsettling, but also comedic, because you have the gore is so good with the torn flesh at the beginning, and then she just starts flying around the room, and it's amazing. I can't believe they literally built a rotating room and nailed all the furniture down to do that. It's
awesome.
It's
so
amazing, and there's something nightmarish about how impressive it is. I think it's really fucking cool.
You're talking about practical effects in this film are seminal and so charming and have aged so well, and we're still seeing the ripples of them in current horror, like the high art horror which the film kids like Hereditary, was just aping the classroom scene from this film, like that's the exact same scene structurally, and it's really amazing seeing even though this is goofy and less like intellectually ambitious, it's still such a prominent influence. And you touching on the physical practical effects on this one being really charming and impressive is really resonates.
These are some of my favorite practical effects I've ever seen. It's not my favorite, but I fucking love the practical effects in this film so much. But yeah, back to that scene, you then have Rod getting whacked by her flailing body, and it's so funny, and like the way he falls is just perfect slapstick. So I think you're so good to bring up Sam Raimi, because they are having fun. They're having so much fun doing this, but I think there is like genuine horror there. And I loved what you said about this film's premise, kind of imbuing it inherently with more just stuff to digest than a Friday the 13th film, because in this film there is this just constant nightmarish feeling of not being awake, and not just because there are scenes where it's a fake out and they are asleep when you didn't realize, but like the editing and the writing is so perfectly done. Like after that opening nightmare, it cuts to the Freddy song with the girl skipping, and then it immediately transitions into a daytime school scene. So there's never this feeling of like resolution or closure at the beginning. It just kind of constantly feels like you've been dropped into this experience without having any sense of what reality feels like in this film. So I think those like stretches are just a lot more enjoyable than your standard slasher.
Yeah, it's not like a Tarkovsky or a Bergman where like it is generally quite potentially hard to follow at points, and like reality blends and it's like whoa, like, but it is very fun and playful in how it does, like you said, jarringly shift from like dream logic to reality logic, and that kind of it kind of lets all of the bad acting like work, because everything feels so false in this film that it kind of works for it, because it does evoke like this weird dream-like state. Like the dream clinic scene is so bad, it doesn't feel real.
Bro, I actually don't remember that scene.
Fam, they go to a dream clinic, right? And she asks the doctor, "Oh, what are dreams?" And he's like, "I'll be honest with you, man. We don't know where they come from. They're fantasies." And it's like, you're a doctor. You work at a clinic. This is your job. But then it does raise the question of like, is anything in this film really real? Which I guess the series will conclude it is. But that line does make for like quite a fun, lightly surreal experience. Not like actually surreal, like like it is fine to follow, but just a playful surreality, which is really cool tonally in this film.
Yeah, I'd say it's like less of a experience, like a surreal experience. It's just more of a feeling of general. The film, I don't think, is really trying to present everyday life even as reality is what I would say. I do think that's interesting in its own way.
Also, I love how the tone of like violent horror is contrasted with Freddy just being like this fucking shit poster. Like he's so batshit crazy in this film. Like the part when he's chasing her and just starts cutting himself open and maggots come out and then like chops his finger off and like laughs. And like he is just a weird stand-up comedian who's just like playing with these kids.
Or
But
even
also you can get like the hand coming out of the bathtub, which is fucking horrifying. Knives being that close to genitalia is never
not the
fun.
one. Yeah.
Without consent. And and yeah, I kind of love Freddy in this film.
Yeah, like when me and my friends actively laughed out loud when in his introductory scene he has that no, this is God, and it's like really tense, and I mean it's a bit silly, but it is like in the film's language I do think it is a bit duh. And then he just does this like weird old man run at her. It's so funny, and I think this film is definitely constantly undercutting itself, but I think never using that as a crutch to not be like impressive or enjoyable. I want to talk about the second half a little bit more because that's when shit goes crazy. I think it begins with, of course, Glenn's death in the blender bed. I was blown away by this effect. Again, this was achieved by a rotating room, and apparently people on set were like genuinely horrified by how or not horrified, but taken aback by how violent and excessive it was. And the blood even like lopped to one side of the room and kind of broke the room a bit. And so like you can feel all of that in this scene. It is so excessive and terrifying. And to do this to not a well-developed character, I would say, but to do this to a character so bluntly, I think is really impressive. And I think that's something I love about this era of horror particularly, is they kill characters off with such callousness that, number one, it stops you from seeing it happening as soon as the scene starts, but also it makes it all the more like horrifying, as unhorrifying as this film can be, but that it's just done with like this like disaffection. I love it.
Yeah, well, especially like in slashers like this, like these aren't even really characters. Like when they're being introduced, you're like, they're lambs, you know. You're like, oh, I can't wait to watch them all die. You're not meant to. I don't think you're meant to care about these people really, apart from maybe Nancy.
I like Nancy. I do like Nancy.
Yeah, let it be known that everything between Rod's death and Glenn's death is awful and boring and bad, in my opinion. Like the scene when they're on the bridge and he's like eating and telling her like, I read this book about the old dreamers, and they woke up and wrote their dreams down in their journals. What are you reading there, Nancy? Oh, a book about booby traps. It's going to be the third act finale, and I'm setting up that I can do booby traps. It's very it's awful, but yeah, that Glenn death really wakes you up, really jolts you, and it is delightful. I love the effect of him getting sucked into the bed and the bed glowing, and then just like the slow motion blood coming up. Like it is just glorious, and the type of violence that is just delightful. It's wonderful. So I have nothing more to add to that really, other than I agree, it is delightful.
One thing I think this film does do exceptionally well is like turn the physical world against people, which is really scary and so perfectly reminiscent of nightmares. I do think it is actually really hard to pull off the feeling and the world of a nightmares, just because the actual experience of them is so psychedelic. So plucking details from them to put into a film to create that feeling, I think does take a lot of talent. I mean, and that shows because of the reception that this film has gotten. But so details like the stairs turning into like mush as she runs up them and things like that is so creative. I think it's perfect, and like it so turns Freddy from this like maniacal man with a claw for a hand into this this force of nature that I think he kind of becomes more in his sequels.
Yeah. I guess like before we get to the climax of the film, I do want to think a bit about like I guess thematically what this film is setting up for the franchise and how much it works. Like there is this like the it's revealed that the mother and the other parents of Elm Street killed Freddy because he was killing kids.
Yeah.
Side note, I would enjoy a prequel film about the parents banding together to kill Freddy. I'm
That would
surprised they
be
never made that.
cool.
But anyway, so yeah, you're safe, Nancy. Freddy's dead because Mummy killed him and all that. And I guess I feel like there is something here being said about like the future generations suffering because of the actions of past generations, which is kind of vague and I guess like would be the boomer mindset.
Yeah.
Um uh but yeah, I think I don't know. I in this first film I find it really hard to grapple onto some sort of like thematic through line or statement. I do think again there's very like loose stuff about Freddie as an abuser. And the final line of Nancy rejecting him, where she says, "I take back every bit of energy I gave you. You're nothing. You're shit." A very great moment. So there is a sort of loose narrative about like rejecting abusers or like older men who have kind of like given you trauma, which I guess like the dreams and no one believing teenagers about like this traumatic experience they had and this recurring dream. It's there, but it is kind of foggy.
Yeah.
I do think as goofy as goofy as part three is, I do think this is one thing they weirdly get more refined on. Those themes. But yeah, do you want to talk about the climax?
Yeah, just before that, I think there's like a little bit about trying to reconcile with like parents that have justified their neglect by like feeling as though they've conquered societal evils, but actually aren't paying attention to your struggles as a teenager, which I think like in film and in general at the time was quite a prevalent thing of just like
Yeah.
feeling dejected from your parents and like they're just this kind of force of guidance rather than a person to like resonate with you. But yeah, I do agree it is like loose.
Because I guess like the Gen X / Boomer angst are very similar. Where Rebel Without a Cause, the angst is like the previous generations were the great heroes, did the world wars, and like we owe so much to them, but the world seems worse than it was because of what they did, maybe. And
Yeah.
same with post Vietnam kids in the 80s, right? Like your parents like, we fought a war for you, we killed Freddy, like you should be grateful. And it's like, no, but you're a wreck, you're an alcoholic, like you
Yes,
can't give me
exactly.
love. Like the war, killing Freddy / Vietnam maybe ruined you. So I do, yeah, there is that 80s thematic crunch here, maybe, if you want to see it.
And the hypocrisy that comes with that as well when she takes away Nancy's coffee because she's like trying to fight against this genuine negative thing in her life, and then you go and see Marge, like not to be like alcoholics bad, but then she goes and like gets a bottle of like vodka or something from a closet. And
Yeah.
I think there is a little bit there of kind of passing things on to our children, like you were saying. Um,
Fun
and
fact: the actress who plays Marge, who is awful, by the way.
yeah, I think she's probably the worst person in this film by far.
She's the ex-wife of Wim Wenders,
That's fucking crazy.
and Wes
What?
Craven was staying at Wim Wenders' apartment while making this film. So I get the vibe that there was some sort of nepotism happening here. Like, hey, I'll give you a place to crash if you give my ex-wife a role. I don't know what happened,
Yeah,
but it's very strange.
she's bad. She's like really bad. Like, it is really hard watching her in those scenes where she's like, "Mama was trying to protect you," kind of thing.
The
Uh,
most monotone monologue about
yeah,
killing
yeah.
killing a child murderer.
Side note:
Uh,
did they do the right thing? Aha. No, yeah.
oh well. Well, we'll
Let's
find
keep
out. We'll find out
it.
in the next 5 films, I guess.
And so that, yeah, I guess onto the climax. It goes off the rails, I would say. I think this could be a problem for people. It wasn't a problem for me personally, but I feel like that level of care and theatrics that was put into like the kills with Glenn and Tina is absent here, which I thought was really fun, and it becomes this maniacal stunt double driven insanity.
Yeah, the
Like,
fucking mask they put on Freddy when he's burning is so awful and
it's
clearly a
so
mask.
bad.
And fair enough, you shouldn't burn yourself alive for Nightmare on Elm Street 1984.
I think
But
it was
it is
fucking worth
bad.
it though, because it's a if that got that stunt done, I'm happy with it, because I think that's a fucking sick stunt. It stays for so long, and it was one take.
Yeah, it's
It was
pretty fun. It's
one
pretty cool.
take. They did that in one. It's amazing. What is scary though is when moments later on, you see him like I guess straddling her mother and like burning her alive, and then after he's been covered up, after like the fire's put out by her police officer father, she's this like charred corpse that then sinks into the bed, and it's so goofy but kind of weirdly cool, I think.
Yeah, I do love that ending. And I'll give you this. There is like a jump scare when Nancy wakes up after trying to battle Krueger for a bit, and she's like, "Oh, I'm crazy after all." And then Freddy jumps up like, "Wah!" And like
Yeah.
that made my eyes widen, and it was a playful jump scare. I will give you that. That was
But Josh
cool.
is not scared.
But no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the tone of this film is seems like a comedy to me.
I think
Yeah,
it's more comedy than horror.
but moving on from that, like to the ending of this film, it's actually like I really loved the last scene of this film, other than the last 10 seconds. Um, Everything before the really dumb Freddy becomes a car bit. I really love it reminds me a lot of Blue Velvet. So the end of Blue Velvet, you get this really like saturated, optimistic, dreamlike tone, which is so like mawkish, it's false, and in its falsity, it's like really scary. Um, and this is the exact same thing where they walk out of the house and everything's completely fine. The mother's still alive and everything's saturated and it's all like hazy. And it's very clearly a dream. And then all the friends are still alive. Like the whole thing was just a dream, and she drives away. But it's so false, it's so eerie. And there's like this line that Johnny Depp's character gives of like, I don't know what the deal with all this fog is, which is like implying that like Nancy's like either died or gone insane in the house, in a burning house, and it's like this is all just her mind spiraling out in imagination,
Yeah.
which is like really cool. I really like that as an ending, and the kind of ambiguity of it. I guess I didn't like that they threw in the Freddy car and then the hand come out the window as the last gotcha moment. Although I do really like how the mother, like a doll of the mother, like
It's the funniest thing
a
I've ever
mannequin
seen.
is like sucked through the window in the fastest pace. That is very Evil Dead, and I do really dig that effect. It's really hard to like dislike anything in this film because even the worst stuff I really dig.
Yeah.
It's so goofy. Yeah.
It's top 10 funniest moments in movie. And yeah, I'll just like the ending singer, I don't know. Like my housemate turned to me and was like, "Oh, it's just to like be like, oh, was it all a dream, or like what was really reality?" And I just thought that wasn't the movie. Like the movie was kind of like an adventure comedy film about defeating this thing, and it opens up so many kind of uninteresting questions that I think it doesn't spoil it, because again, like it kind of retconned. Yeah, it's not that serious a film anyway. But I was just like,
but also, I don't even think I think questions that opens up are purely incidental and accidental. The film isn't like even from the studio level of mandating this ending, isn't trying to open up those questions.
yeah,
It is just because slasher films are roller coasters, and when people go to see them, you expect to leave feeling like exhilarated. So you have to end on a note of
yeah.
like open-ended horror. Like you leave the theater like, whoa, that was crazy. I'm gonna definitely go see the second one next year to find out, more about, I want to see more Freddy, and I want to feel that feeling again. So I do think it's just purely there for like an adrenaline rush. So you leave the theater feeling like you saw a good horror film.
I completely agree.
So I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying like I do not think it's like a narrative choice to end the film that way.
No, yeah, but yeah, it sucks because I think that the rest of the film does feel that way. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to be doing this for all of the films, but with this one, there aren't a huge kills. But what was your favorite kill in the film?
Oh man. Okay. So can I pick a favorite kill and a favorite effect?
Oh yeah, okay. I'll allow
So
it.
my favorite kill is the Johnny Depp kill. Just the geyser of blood, and then the mum walking in and screaming and it splattering all over her. Fucking awesome. I love that. I want to see that every day.
Yeah.
My favorite effect though is Freddy coming out of the wall, and it's like this kind of rubbery wall thing, and
Yeah.
his face is like really pressed up against the rubber, and Nancy's sleeping, and that's also the poster of the film. It's stylized a bit in the poster, but I really love yeah, I think it's really charming and cute in a weird way. Like I want that I want like a doll of that, like a little Freddy coming out of the wall, and I don't know, I think it's really cute. I never explained that well, but yeah, those are my favorite like
so.
visual moments in the film.
I think those are good picks. I'm so torn. I'm so torn between that and Tina's, and I'm not gonna avoid it based on your pick. I'm gonna say I really love Tina's.
Yeah, the brutality.
Yeah, I love how long it holds on to it, and it's just torture. In the same way, it is kind of different to that first one because it again, that one's a very confident moment of just horror and like comedy as well. But this is just like just this poor girl getting absolutely brutalized. It's horrible, and her boyfriend watching the whole time and just screaming her name and doing nothing about it. It's such a perfect like orchestra of comedy and horror at the same time, and I love it so much.
Can I just ask, what is the deal with Tina and her boyfriend? I legit do not understand the dynamics. It's okay, because like the whole time they don't establish that she's his girlfriend. So the whole beginning, I was like, oh, he's just like the creepy.
Yeah.
He's like Bender in Breakfast Club, like the creepy burnout dude who like is violent and gross to women.
Yeah.
But then she's like super. Then she's like, "Oh, guys, you can't leave me alone with that monster." And then she goes up and like loudly has sex with him and is really into it. And I'm like, "What is going on here?"
Yeah. No, it was really confusing. And
I
then
love.
he kind of cares about like her as well,
weird.
because when he's accused of being the murderer, as he would be, you kind of feel for him. He's not just upset because he's been accused of being a murderer. He's upset because he's been accused of being the murderer of this girl specifically. So yeah, it is weird.
After he nuts, he just becomes a different character. He becomes like really nice and caring and good. And I'm like, what the fuck? But one of the funniest shots in the film is while they're having like cartoonishly loud sex.
Yeah.
It cuts to like Johnny Depp, who's been sent to the couch by his girlfriend, who he's very nice to, but for some reason they sent him to the couch, and he's just like, oh man, I gotta sit here and listen to fucking, and I can't fuck. And it's like, God, you really felt his plight in that moment. Great film.
It's cinema.
Chinima.
Cinema.
Chinima.
My favorite effect. God, no, we can't stop doing that. We never stop when we start. Favorite effect. I just had it up. Oh, I think my favorite effect. You brought it up earlier. It's nothing particularly impressive, but it really got to me when he cut his flesh open and the maggots were there. It's obviously a very actually easy effect because you just do a detail shot to like something completely different. Is his torso, but when it then pans out and you see his like flesh ripped open and the maggots still there, it's so horrible. And I fucking hate maggots, but I love gore. So I just thought it was fucking cool. So yeah, that's my favorite effect and my favorite kill. So Josh, would you recommend A Nightmare on Elm Street as a Halloween movie?
Hell yeah, man! I give this a decent recommend. Like the flavor of this film is so good and nice to be in.
Yeah.
Like okay, what's her name? Who plays Nancy again? Ladenkamp.
Heather Langenkamp.
Heather Langenkamp is bad, and she only gets worse as the series goes on.
Oh, I
But
really like
I love her like weird vacant stares and like fits of anger and like abusive outbursts. Like when she smashes the alcohol bottle and her mom like cowers from her. Like what the
yeah,
man? Everything about this film is just like everything that you could criticize, like Heather's performance. Johnny Depp's incredibly flat. Robert England is like this weird fumbling old scarred guy. It's all just delightful. Like this film is having so much fun being what it is, and it's really impossible not to be won over by it. It's charismatic and yeah, and you can look for like I guess deeper meanings, like the generational angst. But yeah, it's such a great time, and yeah, it's impossible for me not to give this like a very decent recommend.
Yeah, straight up. Yeah, I'll completely agree with you there. I think, yeah, this film is a perfect melting pot of good and bad and the in between, and it all becomes this lovely hearty stew that I could eat for the rest of my fucking life. I think this is a prime Halloween film, one of the best you could possibly watch, simply because it is so easy in the like there are yeah like Josh said better horror films you could watch, and there are probably more technically crazy slasher films and gore films that you could watch, but I think this is such it's that mix of good and bad that makes this film such a perfect Halloween time. Like despite not being one of the best things ever made, it's just that perfect level for Halloween and any other time of the year. This is I really loved this.
Like, you can have a good spooky time here, but also not traumatize yourself.
Yeah, and not be bored for too long or anything like that. Like that is such a perfect level to be at. So yeah, I really recommend this film.
I think going forward, like hopefully soon, we'll do the other three, or just like all of them. I don't know how many you want to do, but at least up till the final chapter. And I think it'll be really interesting to see like if those films, I assume they're all bad, and what differentiates an actual bad Nightmare on Elm Street film versus the first one, which isn't really good in a traditional sense, but is like recommendable. Like, at what point does bad become not recommendable?
Yeah,
like in these cheesy horror films, like I'm really curious to see where that line is.
That's so interesting. I'm so excited. And if we're going further than 3, we're going to the end. That's what I'm gonna say. If a Nightmare on Elm Street film comes out as we're doing it, we're doing that one as well.
Yeah, we will eternally review Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Welcome to the Freddy Krueger retrospective podcast. So yeah, that wraps it up for the first part of our Nightmare on Elm Street, I guess, trilogy discussion. Like I said, we'll be releasing another episode on the sequels. We were thinking Friday, but I just had a thought. If I release it Saturday, I'm releasing it on Halloween, which would be kind of cool. So I'll think about that.
But everyone's going to
And
be out partying and
oh,
getting diseased on that night. They
that's
won't be
so
listening to our podcast.
fuck. Okay. Tune in for that, where we'll be talking about again Freddy's Revenge and Dream Warriors. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, all that jazz. And
Yeah,
we'll see you next time.
yeah. Follow us on social media. And remember,
That too.
it's a nightmare. It's just a dream, 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 dream.